The starward Hope moved through the darkness of space like a silver needle threading through black cloth. Commander Grace stood at the observation window and watched the distant stars pass by. She had been a soldier for 15 years, but today she was something else. Today she was a diplomat. The thought made her smile, but only a little. Behind her, Lieutenant Noah Perry checked his equipment for the third time. He was young, barely 30, with short brown hair and nervous hands. He trusted Grace with his life, but he did not trust the aliens they were about to meet. They had a reputation. They were big. They were strong. They believed that power was the only thing that mattered in the universe, and they did not think much of humans. Specialist Brooks sat at her console, reading everything she could find about culture. She was the teams, which meant she studied alien languages and customs. She had spent 3 months learning to speak, and another 2 months learning how to not offend them. It was harder than it sounded. They found almost everything offensive. Grace turned away from the window and looked at her team. They were good people, smart, capable, but she could see the worry in their eyes. Everyone knew this mission was dangerous. The Dominion had been expanding into neutral space for the past 2 years. They had taken 3 mining colonies and 2 research stations. Earth's coalition needed to establish boundaries before things got worse. That was why Grace was here, to talk, to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution. She hoped they felt the same way. The ship slowed as they approached 7, a trading station that sat in the middle of neutral territory. It was shaped like a massive wheel, spinning slowly to create artificial gravity. Hundreds of ships were docked along its outer edge. Most of them belonged to species Grace had never seen before. The galaxy was a big place, and humans were still new to it. A voice came through the communication system. It was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. The escort was giving them docking instructions, translated quickly, and the pilot adjusted their course. Within minutes, the starward Hope was locked into place. Grace straightened her uniform and checked her sidearm. It was a small weapon, easily hidden beneath her jacket. She was not supposed to bring weapons to a diplomatic meeting, but she had learned long ago that being prepared was better than being dead. Noah and armed themselves as well. None of them said anything about it. The airlock opened with a soft hiss and Grace stepped onto the station. The air was warm and smelled strange, like metal and something else she could not identify. Waiting for them was an officer. He was tall, almost 7 feet, with dark green scales that covered his entire body. His eyes were yellow with black slits in the center. He wore armor that looked like it had seen many battles. The officer introduced himself as Subcommander Al. His voice was cold, and he did not offer any greeting beyond his name. He simply turned and began walking, expecting them to follow. Grace exchanged a glance with Noah but said nothing. They followed. The station was crowded with aliens of every shape and size. Some had fur, some had feathers, some had things Grace did not have words for, but everywhere they went, the other species moved out of the way when they saw the officer. It was not respect, it was fear. Al led them through a series of corridors until they reached a large door made of dark metal. 2 guards stood on either side, holding weapons that looked like they could cut through a ship's hull. The door opened, and Grace stepped inside. The room was designed to impress. The ceiling was high, the walls were covered with trophies from conquered worlds, and at the far end sat High Commander Al. He was the largest Grace had ever seen, nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted from deep green to pure black as he moved. His eyes locked onto Grace immediately, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force. Al did not stand to greet them. He simply watched as they approached his throne. When they stopped, he spoke. His voice was like thunder. "So these are the humans," he said, "the fragile ones." Grace kept her expression calm. She had been called worse things by better enemies. She bowed her head slightly, just enough to show respect without showing weakness. "High Commander," she said, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Earth's coalition hopes we can find common ground." Al made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Common ground. You speak as if we are equals." He leaned forward and his scales shifted to a darker shade. "We are not equals, human. They have ruled this sector for 1,000 years. Your species has been traveling the stars for less than a century. You are children playing in a universe you do not understand." Noah tensed beside Grace, but she placed a hand on his arm to calm him. She had expected this. They respected strength, but they also respected those who did not break under pressure. She would show them that humans could be strong too. "Perhaps we are young," Grace said, "but children grow and we learn quickly." Al studied her for a long moment. Then he raised one clawed hand and gestured to his guards. They moved forward, drawing their weapons. Grace's hand moved toward her hidden sidearm, but she stopped herself. This was a test. She could feel it. The guards did not attack. Instead, they held out their weapons for inspection. Al smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Craftsmanship," he said. "The finest in the galaxy. Would you like to see?" Grace stepped forward without hesitation. She took one of the weapons and examined it carefully. It was heavy, well-balanced, and beautifully made. She turned it over in her hands, testing its weight, checking its edge. The guards watched her with surprise. They had expected her to be afraid. "Impressive," Grace said. She handed the weapon back. "Your smiths are truly skilled." Al's smile faded. He had wanted to frighten her, but she had not been frightened. She had been curious. It was not the reaction he expected. The negotiations began after that. They talked for hours about borders and trade routes and mining rights. It was slow, difficult work. They gave nothing easily and they demanded much in return. But Grace was patient. She pushed when she could and gave ground when she had to. By the end of the first day, they had made some progress. Not much, but some. That night, Grace and her team returned to their quarters on the station. Noah swept the room for listening devices while reviewed the day's recordings. Grace stood by the window and looked out at the stars. Something felt wrong. She could not explain it, but her instincts were telling her to be careful. They were up to something. She just did not know what. In another part of the station, Al sat alone in his chambers. Al stood before him, waiting for orders. "The humans are more stubborn than I expected," Al said. "But it does not matter. Arrange an incident, something that will give us reason to act." Al bowed, and the human delegation. Al's scales shifted to pure black. They do not leave this station alive. The second day of negotiations was harder than the first. Al seemed less interested in talking and more interested in making demands. He wanted human technology. He wanted access to Earth's outer colonies. He wanted things that Grace could not give him, and he knew it. He was stalling. Grace could feel it in her bones. But she kept talking. She kept pushing. And slowly she began to notice something interesting. Not all they agreed with their commander. There was a young female officer who stood near the back of the room during every meeting. Her name was and she was different from the others. When Al made cruel jokes about humans, she did not laugh. When he threatened and boasted, she looked away. Grace caught her eye once, just for a moment, and saw something unexpected there. Doubt. Noticed it too. During a break in the talks, she leaned close to Grace and whispered, "The young one, she is not happy." Grace nodded. "I saw. Keep watching her. She might be useful." The talks continued until evening. When they finally ended, Grace felt exhausted but hopeful. They had agreed on a temporary border. It was not perfect, but it was something. She shook hands with Al, who looked at her like she was an insect he wanted to crush, and then led her team back to their quarters. Noah was quiet during the walk. When they were alone, he finally spoke. "Something is wrong," he said. "I have been watching the station's patrol patterns. They changed this morning. More guards near our section, fewer near the docking bays. It is like they are boxing us in." Grace sat down on the edge of her bed. "I noticed it too. They are planning something." "Should we leave?" asked. "We could call for extraction. The Starward Hope is ready to go." Grace shook her head. "If we run now, we lose everything. Al will claim we broke the negotiations. He will use it as an excuse to invade our space." She looked at her team. "We stay. We finish what we started, but we prepare for the worst." Noah pulled a small device from his pocket. It was no bigger than a coin. "I brought this, a disruption unit. If I can get it into the station's power grid, I can kill the lights for 10 minutes, maybe longer." Grace took the device and turned it over in her hands. "How do you plan to plant it?" "There is an access panel in the corridor outside. I can do it tonight while the guards are changing shifts." He paused. "If we miss our check-in window tomorrow, the device will activate automatically." Grace handed the device back to him. "Do it." That night, Noah slipped out of their quarters while Grace kept watch. He was gone for almost an hour. When he returned, he was sweating and out of breath, but he was smiling. "Done," he said. "If anything happens, we will have our darkness." They slept in shifts, never leaving the room unguarded. Grace dreamed of Earth. She dreamed of blue skies and green fields and the smell of rain. She missed home. She wondered if she would ever see it again. Morning came too quickly. They dressed and prepared for another day of negotiations. But when Grace opened the door, she found Al waiting for them. He was not alone. 20 soldiers stood behind him, their weapons drawn. "High Commander Al requires your presence," Al said. "Immediately." Grace kept her voice calm. "We were just about to come to the meeting room." "The meeting room has changed." Al's yellow eyes gleamed. "You will come with us now." There was no point in arguing. Grace nodded to her team and they followed the soldiers. But instead of going to the negotiation chamber, they were led deeper into the station. The corridors grew darker. The air grew colder. Grace knew where they were going. The detention level. She reached for her hidden weapon, but before she could draw it, a soldier grabbed her arm. Another grabbed Noah, was pushed to the ground. The fight was over before it started. They were outnumbered and surrounded. Grace watched as Noah was hit with a stun weapon and collapsed, cried out as a guard pressed her face into the floor. Grace did not cry out. She did not beg, she fought. Her elbow connected with the jaw of the soldier holding her. He stumbled back and she spun, kicking another guard in the knee. He went down hard. She reached for her weapon, finally drawing it, and fired twice. 2 more soldiers fell, but there were too many. A blow to the back of her head sent her to her knees. Her weapon was knocked away. Rough hands grabbed her and forced her arms behind her back. Al stepped forward and looked down at her. "Impressive," he said, "for a human." They were dragged to a large chamber where Al waited. The High Commander sat on a throne of black metal, surrounded by his elite guards. His scales were darker than Grace had ever seen them. He looked pleased. "Commander," he said, "I must admit, you surprised me. I did not expect you to fight so well. Most humans simply beg for mercy." Grace lifted her head and met his gaze. "I am not most humans." Al laughed. It was a cold, terrible sound. "No, you are not, but it does not matter. You and your crew are spies. You came here to steal our secrets and undermine our power. The penalty for espionage is death." "We are diplomats," Grace said, "protected by interstellar law." "Law?" Al leaned forward. "I am the law here, human, and I say you are guilty." He gestured to Al. "Search her, she is hiding something." Al approached Grace. His scanner beeped, detecting the weapon still hidden beneath her jacket. She had lost her primary sidearm, but she always carried a backup. Al smiled and reached for it. Grace smiled back. "That is your first mistake," she said. The lights went out. The darkness was absolute. They cried out in confusion. Their eyes were built for bright light, and in total blackness they were almost blind. But Grace had trained for this. All humans trained for this. They called it night fighting, and they were very good at it. She twisted free from her captors, using their confusion against them. She dropped low, avoiding the wild swings of their weapons. Her hands found her backup weapon and she pulled it free. She did not fire. Not yet. In the darkness, the flash would give away her position. Instead, she moved, silent, fast, deadly. Noah's device had worked perfectly. The lights would stay off for 10 minutes. That was enough. That was all she needed. They stumbled and shouted, crashing into each other. Grace slipped between them like a ghost. She found first, cutting her bonds with a small blade. Then they found Noah, who was already waking up from the stun blast. He groaned but got to his feet. "We need to move," Grace whispered. "Stay close, stay quiet." They moved through the chaos, leaving the chamber behind. They were too confused to follow. By the time the emergency lights flickered on, the humans were gone. Grace led her team through the dark corridors of the station. They were not running toward the docking bay. They were not trying to escape. They had a different destination in mind. "The communication array," Grace said. "We need to broadcast what happened here. We need proof of Al's treachery." Noah nodded. "If we can reach it, I can send a message to Earth. The whole galaxy will know what they did." Checked her scanner. "The array is 3 levels up. There will be guards." "There are always guards," Grace said. "That has never stopped us before." They moved forward into the darkness, ready to fight for their lives and the truth. The emergency lights cast everything in a dull red glow. Grace moved through the corridors with her weapon raised, checking every corner before moving forward. Noah was behind her, supporting who had twisted her ankle during the escape. They were hurt and tired, but they were alive. For now, that was enough. The station was in chaos. Alarms blared from every direction. Soldiers ran past them, too focused on finding the escaped prisoners to notice 3 shadows moving in the darkness. Grace used their confusion to her advantage, slipping from one hiding spot to the next. They reached a maintenance hatch and stopped. Noah pulled out his scanner and checked the route ahead. "The communication array is 200 meters that way," he said, pointing down a narrow corridor. "But there are at least 10 soldiers between us and the door." Grace nodded. "Then we find another way." Limped forward and looked at the maintenance hatch. "These tunnels run through the whole station. They use them for repairs and cleaning. They are not guarded because they are too small for bodies." "But not too small for humans," Noah said, understanding. Grace opened the hatch and looked inside. It was dark and cramped, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. The smell of machine oil and recycled air filled her nose. It was not pleasant, but it was their best option. "Can you make it?" Grace asked. Tested her ankle and winced. "I will manage." They crawled into the tunnel one by one. Grace went first, her weapon held awkwardly in front of her. The metal walls pressed in from all sides. Every few meters, they passed a vent that looked down into the corridors below. Grace could see soldiers searching for them, overturning furniture and breaking down doors. They crawled for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, Grace found a hatch that opened near the communication center. She pushed it open slowly and peered out. The corridor was empty except for 2 guards standing by the main door. They were alert, their weapons ready. Grace could not take them both before one raised the alarm. She was about to pull back and look for another option when a voice spoke from behind the guards. "Stand down." The guards turned in surprise. The young female officer Grace had noticed during the negotiations stepped out of the shadows. She wore light armor and her scales were a pale shade of green. "Sub-Commander," one of the guards said, "we have orders to let no one pass." "Your orders have changed," said. Her voice was steady, but Grace could see her hands trembling slightly. "High Commander Al wants the prisoners brought to him alive. I will take over guard duty here. You are needed in the detention level." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. I outranked them, but something about this felt wrong. Still, they had no reason to disobey a direct order. They bowed their heads and left. When they were gone, I turned toward the maintenance hatch. "You can come out now, Commander." Grace climbed out of the tunnel slowly, her weapon aimed at a. "How did you know we were there?" "I did not know for certain," I admitted, "but I guessed. You are not trying to escape. You are trying to expose what Al has done. The communication array is the only way to do that." She paused. "I want to help you." "Why?" Noah asked, climbing out behind Grace. "Why would you betray your own people?" A's scales shifted to a darker shade. "I am not betraying my people. I am trying to save them." She looked at Grace with something like desperation in her yellow eyes. "Al is leading us toward a war we cannot win. He does not care how many die as long as he gets his glory. Many of us see this. Many of us want change, but we cannot act without proof of his crimes. And if we broadcast what happened here, you will have that proof," Grace said. I nodded. "The whole Dominion will see what kind of leader Al truly is. It will be the end of him." Grace studied the young officer for a long moment. This could be a trap. It could be leading them into an ambush, but Grace's instincts told her otherwise. She saw the same thing in that she saw in herself, a soldier who was tired of fighting for the wrong reasons. "All right," Grace said. "We work together, but if you betray us, I will kill you myself." I actually smiled. It was a strange expression on a face, but it was genuine. Fair enough. Climbed out of the tunnel last, and I led them to the communication center door. She entered a code, and the heavy metal panel slid open. The room inside was filled with machines and screens. Banks of computers lined the walls, and a massive antenna array rose from the center of the floor. Noah rushed to the main console and began working. "I can route a message to every ship in the sector," he said. "Earth, the Coalition, even the neutral stations. Everyone will hear what happened." "Do it," Grace said. Pulled out a small recording device. "I have audio from the negotiations. Al threatening us. Al admitting to the ambush. It is all here." Noah took the device and plugged it into the console. His fingers flew across the controls. 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes." They did not have 5 minutes. The door behind them exploded inward. Soldiers poured into the room, led by Al himself. His scales were black with rage, and his weapon was already firing. Grace dove behind a console, pulling with her. Energy bolts scorched the air above their heads. A drew her own weapon and fired back, but she was quickly forced into cover. "Keep working," Grace shouted at Noah. "We will hold them off." She rose from cover and fired 3 shots. 2 soldiers fell, but more were coming. The doorway was filled with them, a wall of scales and claws and weapons. Al roared and charged forward. He was faster than any Grace had seen. She fired at him, but he dodged, closing the distance between them in seconds. His clawed hand caught her arm and threw her across the room. She hit a wall hard and slid to the floor. "Foolish human," Al hissed. "Did you think you could defeat us? We have conquered 100 worlds. You are nothing but prey." Grace pushed herself up, tasting blood in her mouth. Prey that keeps fighting. She lunged at him with her blade, a small knife she had kept hidden in her boot. Al was surprised by her speed. The blade cut across his arm, drawing dark blood. He howled in pain and swung at her, but she ducked under his blow and stabbed again, this time catching him in the leg. Al stumbled. Grace kicked his wounded leg and he went down to one knee. She pressed her blade against his throat. "Tell your soldiers to stand down," she said. Before Al could answer, a new voice filled the room. It was deep and cold and filled with dark amusement. "Impressive, Commander, truly impressive." Al walked through the door, stepping over the bodies of fallen soldiers. His elite guards surrounded him, their weapons trained on Grace and her team. Behind them, more soldiers filled the corridor. There was no escape. Al looked at her with disgust. "A traitor among my own officers. I should have known you were too weak for your rank." A stood tall despite her fear. "I am not weak. I am the first to stand against you. I will not be the last." Al ignored her. His eyes were fixed on Grace. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble, human, but it ends now. Surrender and I will make your deaths quick." Grace glanced at Noah. He was still at the console, still working. She needed to buy him more time. "I have a better idea," she said. "Let us settle this the old way, your way." Al's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Grace took a deep breath. She was about to gamble everything on a piece of information had found in the archives, a tradition so old that most had forgotten it existed. "I challenge you," Grace said to her. The room went silent. Al's scales shifted through 3 different colors before settling on a pale shade Grace had never seen before. Behind him, his soldiers whispered among themselves. "You cannot be serious," Al said. "I am," Grace replied. "Single combat, you and me. The winner takes everything." A stepped forward, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "She has invoked the ancient right. By law, you cannot refuse." Al's claws clenched at his sides. His scales had shifted to pure black. He was trapped by his own traditions, and he knew it. "Very well, human," he said. "I accept your challenge, and when I tear you apart I will make your crew watch." Grace smiled. "We will see." The central chamber of 7 was the largest space on the entire station. It was built for grand ceremonies and important announcements, with a high ceiling and walls covered in banners from 100 conquered worlds. Now it served a different purpose. It was an arena. Grace stood at one end of the chamber, stripped of her weapons except for a single blade. The weapon was long and curved, made of a dark metal that seemed to drink in the light. It was heavy in her hands, heavier than any sword she had trained with on Earth. But she had studied combat forms for years. She knew how to use it. At the other end of the chamber stood Al. He was massive and terrible, his scales shifting between green and black as his emotions changed. He held a blade identical to hers, but it looked small in his enormous claws. He did not need a weapon to be dangerous. He was a weapon. Around them, hundreds had gathered to watch. Some were soldiers, some were civilians, some were officers who had come to see their high commander destroy the human who had dared to challenge him. But Grace noticed other faces in the crowd too. Younger who looked uncertain, officers who exchanged worried glances. Not everyone wanted her to lose. A stood near the front of the crowd next to Noah and she had argued for the humans to be allowed to watch, and Al had agreed. He wanted them to see their commander die. He wanted them to know fear. But Grace was not afraid. She had been afraid many times in her life. She had felt terror in the darkness of space and in the chaos of battle, but fear had never stopped her. It had only made her more determined to survive. A gong sounded, deep and resonant. The duel had begun. Al charged immediately. He crossed the distance between them in 3 massive strides, his blade cutting through the air like a thunderbolt. Grace did not try to block. She knew she could not match his strength. Instead, she moved. She stepped to the side at the last moment, letting his blade pass within inches of her body. The force of his swing carried him forward, and Grace struck at his exposed side. Her blade cut a shallow line across his scales, drawing dark blood. The crowd gasped. First blood had gone to the human. Al roared and spun around, swinging his blade in a wide arc. Grace dropped to the floor, feeling the weapon pass over her head. She rolled and came up behind him, striking again at his legs. Another shallow cut. More blood. "Stand still," Al bellowed. "Fight me properly." Grace circled him slowly, her blade ready. "This is how I fight, speed over strength, precision over power," she smiled. "You are bigger than me, stronger than me, but you are also slower, and in combat slow means dead." Al snarled and attacked again. He was faster this time, more controlled. His blade came at her from multiple angles, a blur of dark metal. Grace blocked what she could and dodged what she could not, but she was tiring. Every block sent pain shooting through her arms. Every dodge pushed her muscles closer to their limits. She needed to end this soon. Al pressed his advantage, driving her back toward the wall. The crowd cheered as their commander took control of the fight. Grace could see triumph in his yellow eyes. He thought he had won. That was exactly what she wanted. She let herself stumble just a little. She let her guard drop just a fraction. Al saw the opening and took it. He lunged forward, putting all his strength into a killing blow. But Grace was not where he expected her to be. She had dropped to one knee, sliding under his attack. As his blade struck the wall behind her, she drove her own weapon upward. The tip found the gap between his neck and shoulder, where the scales were thinnest. It sank deep. Al screamed. It was a sound Grace had never heard before, a mix of pain and disbelief and rage. He stumbled backward, clutching at the wound. Dark blood poured between his claws. His blade fell from his hand and clattered to the floor. Grace rose to her feet, breathing hard. Her entire body ached and her arms trembled with exhaustion, but she was still standing. Al was not. The High Commander fell to his knees. His scales had turned a sickly gray color, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He looked up at Grace with hatred burning in his eyes. "Finish it," he growled. "Kill me and be done with it." Grace stood over him, her blade raised. One strike would end his life. One strike would end everything. The crowd was silent, waiting to see what she would do. She lowered her weapon. "No," she said. The word echoed through the chamber. Al stared at her in confusion. The in the crowd murmured among themselves, uncertain what was happening. "In your culture, killing a defeated enemy proves your strength," Grace said. She spoke loudly so everyone could hear. "In my culture, sparing them proves something more important. It proves that you do not need to destroy your enemies to defeat them. It proves that you are strong enough to show mercy." She stepped back from Al and turned to face the crowd. "I did not come here to conquer you. I did not come here to destroy your people or take your worlds. I came here to find peace. Your High Commander refused that peace. He chose treachery and murder instead of diplomacy. He would have led your people into a war that would have cost millions of lives on both sides." She pointed at Al, who was still kneeling on the floor, his hand pressed against his wound. "This is your leader. A male who betrays guests under a flag of truce, a male who would sacrifice his own soldiers for glory, a male who lies and murders and calls it strength." She paused. "Is this what they truly are? Is this what you want to be?" The chamber was silent, then slowly a step forward. "No," she said, "this is not what we are. This is not what we want to be." She walked to the center of the arena and stood before Al. Her voice was clear and strong. "By the ancient laws of our people, the High Commander has been defeated in or his authority is broken, his commands are void." She turned to face the crowd. "I claim the right of succession. I claim command of the Dominion forces at this station." For a moment nothing happened. Then one by one officers began to step forward. They placed their fists over their hearts in the salute. First 10, then 20, then hundreds. They were not saluting Al, they were saluting a. Al watched in horror as his power crumbled around him. "Traitors," he spat. "All of you, cowards and traitors." Two soldiers stepped forward and hauled him to his feet. His wound was serious, but it was not fatal. He would live. He would face justice. Approached Grace and extended her hand in the human fashion. "Commander, I believe we have much to discuss." Grace took her hand and shook it firmly. "I believe we do." Noah pushed through the crowd, grinning despite the exhaustion on his face. The broadcast went out. Everything. The ambush, the treachery, all of it. Every ship in the sector received it. The coalition, the neutral stations, even the. Limped up beside him, supported by a young medic who had volunteered to help. "It is over. The truth is out." Grace looked around the chamber at the who had chosen to stand against their commander, at a who had risked everything to do what was right, at her own team who had fought and bled and nearly died beside her. "No," she said softly, "it is not over, it is just beginning." But for the first time since they had arrived at 7, she believed that beginning might lead somewhere good. 3 weeks had passed since the duel. In that time, everything had changed. 7 was no longer a place of tension and fear. The station had become something new, a symbol of what was possible when two species chose cooperation over conflict, and human ships docked side by side. Soldiers who had been enemies now shared meals and traded stories. It was strange and awkward and sometimes difficult, but it was also real. Grace sat in the observation lounge, watching a cargo ship pass by the window. Her wounds had healed, though she still felt the ache in her arms when she moved too quickly. The medics had told her she was lucky. A few more minutes in that duel and her muscles would have given out completely. She had won by the narrowest of margins. But she had won. The door behind her opened and a walked in. The young commander, she was officially high commander now, carried herself differently than before. She stood taller. Her scales were a healthy shade of green. The weight of her new responsibility had not broken her. It had made her stronger. "Commander," said, "I hope I am not disturbing you." Grace smiled and gestured to the seat beside her. "Not at all, please sit." Settled into the chair, her tail curling around the armrest in a way that seemed almost nervous. "I wanted to thank you again, for everything. My people owe you a great debt." "Your people do not owe me anything," Grace said. "You did the hard work. You stood up against Al. You convinced your officers to follow you. I just gave you the opportunity." Was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The Dominion Council has accepted the new treaty, permanent borders, trade agreements, cultural exchange programs. It is more than we ever expected." Grace nodded. She had been present for the final negotiations, which had gone far more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. The broadcast of Al's treachery had shocked the old guard, the warriors who had supported his aggressive expansion, had been discredited. A new generation of leaders was rising, and they wanted peace. "What will happen to Al?" Grace asked. "He will stand trial," said. "On our before the full council, he will answer for his crimes." She paused. "Some wanted him executed immediately, but I convinced them to wait, to give him a fair trial, to show that we can be just even with those who have wronged us." "That sounds familiar," Grace said. Smiled, showing just a hint of her sharp teeth. "I learned it from you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the ships come and go. After a while, spoke again. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "When the guard tried to take your weapon, you smiled and said it was his first mistake. What did you mean?" Grace thought about the question for a long moment. It felt like years ago, though it had only been weeks. She remembered the darkness of that chamber, the feel of her hidden weapon against her side, the certainty in her heart that she would not die that day. "Humans have a saying," she said. "Never underestimate someone just because they look weak. The guard thought I was helpless because I was small, because I was human. He reached for my weapon without caution, without respect. That was his mistake." "But you could not have known the lights would go out at that moment," said. "No," Grace admitted. "But I knew Noah. I knew he would find a way to help us. And I knew that even in the darkness I had a chance. A small chance, but a chance. Humans have survived for thousands of years by taking small chances and making them work." Considered this. "Your species is strange. You are not the strongest in the galaxy. You are not the fastest or the oldest, but you refuse to accept defeat. Even when all hope seems lost, you keep fighting." "We call it stubbornness," Grace said with a small laugh. "It has gotten us into a lot of trouble over the years, but it has also gotten us out of trouble just as often." The door opened again and Noah walked in. They were dressed in civilian clothes, ready for the journey home. The Starward Hope was scheduled to depart in a few hours, and the crew was eager to see Earth again. "Commander," Noah said, "we are ready when you are." Grace stood and straightened her uniform. She turned to and extended her hand. "High Commander, it has been an honor." Rose and took her hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "The honor is mine, Commander. I hope we will meet again." "I am sure we will," Grace said. "There is a lot of work ahead of us. Building a real peace will not be easy." "No," agreed, "but I believe we can do it together." Grace smiled. She believed it too. The walk to the docking bay was quiet. Grace said goodbye to several officers she had come to know over the past weeks. Some of them even smiled at her, an expression that had seemed impossible just a short time ago. Things were changing. Slowly, awkwardly, but truly changing. The Starward Hope was waiting for them, its hull gleaming under the station lights. Grace paused at the airlock and took one last look at Seven. She thought about everything that had happened here. The fear, the violence, the unexpected allies and the narrow victories. She thought about Al, defeated and broken, and rising to take his place. She thought about her team, who had trusted her with their lives and never once let her down. "Ready to go home?" asked. "More than ready," Grace said. They boarded the ship and took their positions on the bridge. The pilot began the departure sequence, and the clamps holding them to the station released. The Starward Hope drifted free, then turned toward the distant stars. Noah leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "I cannot believe we actually survived that." "I can," said. "Grace had a plan." "Grace always has a plan," Noah agreed. He looked at Grace with something like admiration. "But I have to admit, when you challenged Al to single combat, I thought you had lost your mind." Grace laughed. It felt good to laugh. "I probably had, but it worked." "It worked," Noah repeated, shaking his head. "You fought an 8-foot alien warlord with a sword and won. I'm going to be telling this story for the rest of my life, and no one will believe me." "I will back you up," said. "I have the recordings." They fell into comfortable silence as the ship accelerated toward home. The stars stretched into lines of light as they entered faster-than-light travel. In a few days, they would be back on Earth. There would be reports to file and debriefings to attend and politicians to convince. The work was far from over. But for now, Grace allowed herself to rest. Noah's voice broke the silence. "Commander, I have been thinking about something." "What is it?" "When you were in that duel, when Al had you backed against the wall, were you ever afraid?" Grace considered the question carefully. She remembered the moment Noah was talking about. She remembered feeling her muscles burn with exhaustion. She remembered seeing the killing blow coming and knowing she had only one chance to survive. "Yes," she said finally, "I was terrified." Noah looked surprised. "But you won, you beat him." "Being brave does not mean you are not afraid," Grace said. "It means you are afraid and you keep going anyway. Every human who has ever done something great was afraid. We just do not let that stop us." Nodded slowly. "That is what makes us dangerous." "That is what makes us human," Grace corrected. The Starward Hope sailed on through the darkness, carrying its crew toward home. Behind them, a new alliance was being born. Ahead of them, a future full of possibility waited. There would be challenges. There would be setbacks. There would be days when peace seemed impossible. But Grace knew something the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Humans did not give up. They did not surrender. They did not stop fighting for what was right, no matter how long it took or how hard it got. And that, more than anything else, was why they would survive. That was why they would thrive. That was why, in a universe full of ancient empires and powerful species, humanity would find its place among the stars. Because they were stubborn, because they were brave, because they refused to accept that anything was impossible. And because they always kept going.